She walked into a house that had no running water, no working heat, and no electricity, and offered the owner $1 for it. The owner said yes. That moment, a woman with zero formal training in home renovation, standing in a condemned building in rural North Dakota, is the one that launched a channel with over 500,000 subscribers. But what almost nobody who found Tia Weston through that video knows is the decision that made it possible. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the $1 house was never really the story.
She explicitly doesn't disclose.
It's affordable by American standards. It has neighborhoods with character, a genuine food culture, and the kind of manageable size that lets a young person feel like they're building something real. Tia Weston built her first adult life there. She bought her first house there. She had a job there, working in health insurance, that at least for a while was steady enough. Then the pandemic happened. For millions of Americans working in fields adjacent to healthcare, the pandemic years were a specific kind of economic pressure. Jobs that looked stable from the outside became precarious fast. For Tia, the problem was specific. Her health insurance salary wasn't covering her mortgage. Not by a wide margin, not barely. It just wasn't covering it. She's talked about this directly. The math stopped working. What she did with that information is the part that sets her apart from everyone else who found themselves in the same position. Most people renegotiate. Most people take on a second job, refinance, or move somewhere slightly cheaper within the same metro area. They minimize the disruption. Tia looked at the map differently. She had already developed an eye for property. Her Louisville house wasn't just a place to live. It was a renovation project she worked on and eventually sold. She understood, in a practical and unromantic way, that houses were assets, not just homes. And she had started to notice something about the American housing market that the rest of the country would spend years arguing about. In certain parts of the country, away from the coastal metros and their satellite suburbs, housing was still cheap enough that a person with some willingness to work with their hands could actually get ahead of the math. North Dakota, specifically, kept coming up. Houses in rural North Dakota, real houses, structurally intact, in actual towns with actual people in them, were regularly selling for under $100,000. Not as a novelty, not as a sign of something broken, just as the baseline market rate. For someone who had sold a Louisville property and had money in hand, the numbers pointed in one clear direction. Most people who get to this point in the calculation decide it's an interesting thought experiment and move on. Tia Weston packed up and moved. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Moving to rural North Dakota as a single woman in her late 20s from a city like Louisville is not the obvious next step. It's cold, genuinely, historically cold, in a way that Louisville residents don't regularly experience. The social infrastructure is different. The population density is different. The nearest version of everything familiar is a different kind of distance away. Tia made the move. Her first purchase in North Dakota was a $60,000 house. By Louisville standards, that was already a fraction of what comparable properties would cost. By North Dakota standards, it was a reasonable buy in a small town, the kind of property that had bones but needed work. She renovated it. Not with a contractor, not with a construction crew. She did the work herself, learning as the project demanded it, with the help of her father when the jobs got too large for one person. When the renovation was done, she sold the house. The profit was $30,000. That number matters for two reasons. First, it proved the model. She had taken a piece of real estate, in a state nobody from Louisville was moving to, done the work with her own hands, and walked away with $30,000 in roughly the time a year's worth of salary might have produced, if the salary had been enough to live on to begin with. Second, that $30,000 became the financial foundation for everything that came after. She didn't spend it. She held it as capital for the next purchase. During the renovation of the first house, she had also started documenting the process. Not with the infrastructure of a proper YouTube channel, not with a plan to become a content creator, more as a record, a way of showing what the work actually looked like. Small towns in North Dakota don't have the kind of audience density that fuels local word of mouth the way cities do. But the internet doesn't care about geography. People watching from Louisville, from California, from places that had never heard of small-town North Dakota, started following the process. By the time she was ready to buy her second property, she had something she didn't have when she left Louisville: proof. The renovation worked. The profit was real. The audience was real. All she needed was the next house. The next house was not what she expected. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. The first deal for her second property in North Dakota fell through. That's the part that rarely gets discussed. that the $1 house wasn't the plan. There was another house first, a property she had identified and was prepared to buy. When the inspection revealed that the foundation was compromised beyond what the numbers made sense, the deal died. She walked away. The seller she had been working with knew about another property. He mentioned it almost in passing. A house he had been using for storage, a house he had grown up in, a house he couldn't bring himself to see demolished. He'd been watching it sit empty for years. He mentioned that he would essentially give it away if someone would commit to fixing it, rather than see it torn down or handed off to the fire department for training exercises. That last detail, the fire department, is worth pausing on. When a residential property in a rural American community becomes so deteriorated that local fire departments request it for controlled burn training, it's a signal about the state of the structure. It means the property has passed the threshold where most buyers would even consider it. No running water, no working heat, no functional electrical system, a foundation with visible problems, floorboards so damaged that in certain rooms you could look straight down into the basement through the gaps. This is the house Tia Weston offered $1 for. She's explained the dollar figure. It wasn't a statement, it wasn't a stunt, it was the minimum number that would allow them to draw up legal sale paperwork. The house transferred ownership. She had just bought a condemned building for approximately the price of a can of soda. What she had also just done, though she didn't announce it this way, was commit to a renovation project with no professional qualification, no external funding, no construction crew, and no guarantee that the audience watching her first renovation would follow her into this one. She called her father. She walked back into the house, and she started making a list. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. The scope of the work was large enough that a professional contractor would have quoted a number that made the project untenable. Tia knew that going in. The first priority was structural. The roof had sections that had rotted through, though much of the original timber frame from the early 1920s was still sound. She and her father replaced what needed replacing. Then came the electrical system, then water, then heat. Each phase of the renovation got documented. Every week a video. Not a polished production with a crew and broadcast equipment, a first-person record of what the work looked like at that stage, what went wrong, what had to be redone, what surprised her. The $1 price point made it immediately legible to a wide audience. People understood the premise in a sentence. The execution, watching a young woman with no formal background in construction tackle a condemned house from the inside out, kept them watching. The subscriber count grew during the renovation. So did the sponsorship income. Here is the financial structure that most people who followed the story missed. She funded the $1 house renovation with $32,000 from the sale of her Louisville home, which she had been holding since before the move. The remaining costs and the total renovation eventually reached approximately $40,000, were covered in part by money she earned from sponsorships on the renovation videos themselves. She was making the content about fixing the house and using the revenue from that content to finish fixing the house. Let Loop document the work, earn from the documentation, reinvest in the work, is not the way most renovation channels operate. Most creators either have funding in place before the project starts, or they're working on properties they're being paid to document by a production company. Tia was self-funding in real time, using a channel that hadn't yet established itself as a reliable revenue source. The renovation ran for 37 weeks. She moved into the finished house in March 2025. She'd been living in it for over a month before she described it publicly as feeling like every corner told a story of what it had been and what it had become. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. What her wishes, any account of the $1 house renovation that doesn't include Tia's father is missing a significant part of the story. He was there consistently across the 37 weeks, not as a hired hand, not as a cameo, as a working partner on a project that physically required more than one person to execute safely and correctly. Roof work at that scale, replacing sections of a damaged structure while preserving the original framing where possible, is not a solo job. Neither is the electrical rough-in, or the more intensive structural repairs that a house built in the 1920s and left untouched for years will inevitably present. What the channel surfaced about that partnership was more than logistical. Tia has spoken about the renovation as a shared experience. The hours spent in a house with no heat, in North Dakota, in winter, working through problems they hadn't anticipated. That's a particular kind of proximity. It creates something different from what you build in a normal visit or a phone call. For a woman who had made a genuinely isolating decision, moving alone to a small rural town, in a state where she had no existing network, no professional community, no built-in social structure. Having her father as a consistent presence across the project carried weight that extended beyond the work itself. It kept the renovation from becoming a solitary experience. It kept the documentation honest. When viewers watched the videos, they weren't watching one person performing competence alone. They were watching two people figure things out together. That texture, the human detail inside the renovation project, is what separated Tia's channel from the dozens of other abandoned house renovation accounts that emerged on YouTube in the same period. The $1 price was the hook, the work was the content, but the relationship was the reason people felt something about it. And that's when the decision was made, the one nobody around her saw coming. In late 2025, Tia Weston bought her second abandoned property in the same small North Dakota town. She paid $15,000 for it. The house had been frozen exactly as it was on the day its previous owner passed away in December 2005. 2 decades of abandonment, with no one to move anything or clear anything out. Cigarette butts still in the ashtray, dishes left on the drying rack, now coated in dust. A calendar on the kitchen wall, permanently showing December 2005. Clothing and personal items throughout the rooms, left exactly where they had been placed by someone who, at the time, had every expectation of returning to them. The structural situation was, again, serious. The foundation was crumbling in sections, plaster falling from the walls, floorboards damaged to the point where, in certain areas, the basement was visible through the gaps. The house had also lost components over the years of sitting empty, parts of the structure simply missing. Multiple people in the town had already approached Tia to tell her to be sure and go through the clothing carefully. A recurring rumor, the kind that attaches to old abandoned houses in small towns, suggested money might have been left somewhere inside. Tia mentioned it in a video, clearly bemused by the specificity of the detail and the number of separate people who had told her the same thing. But what she said next in that video is the detail that reframes everything that came before it. She explained that the $15,000 purchase wasn't an opportunity she had stumbled into. It was part of a deliberate plan. Her small North Dakota town, she said, had houses sitting empty across the whole community, properties that had been abandoned for years, in some cases decades, with no one coming back for them. Her stated goal was to buy them, renovate them, and get people living in them again. Every house that came back into use, she argued, helped the town. It was the same logic that had driven the $1 project, but now stated explicitly as a mission rather than an opportunity. She wasn't flipping houses for profit anymore. Or not only that, she was trying to reverse a pattern of rural abandonment one property at a time. Most people who know this story stop here, but the real story starts right now. By the summer of 2026, Tia Weston's channel had passed 579,000 subscribers on YouTube. Her Facebook page had crossed 1.6 million followers, a figure that significantly outpaces her YouTube count and speaks to an older demographic that found her through shared posts rather than direct search. Her Instagram sat at approximately 385,000 followers. Those numbers, taken together, tell a specific story about how her audience grew. The $1 house premise was legible across every platform and every demographic. It didn't require context. It didn't require the viewer to already know who she was. A woman bought a condemned house for $1. The premise explained itself. The renovation content did the rest. Weekly videos meant the audience had a reason to return every Sunday. The consistent cadence built a habit of viewing that a one-off viral video never could have. But the growth pattern also reveals something that Tia has not often discussed directly. The channel's Facebook performance suggests that her audience is not primarily the young, algorithmically active viewer that most YouTube renovation channels target. It's people who are old enough to remember what houses like her North Dakota project looked like when they were lived in. People who grew up in rural communities that have seen the same pattern of abandonment she's trying to reverse. People for whom the emotional register of her content isn't novelty, it's recognition. That audience connection is not something you engineer with a content strategy. It emerges from doing something real, in a real place, and letting people watch it happen. The channel she runs now, posting every Sunday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, with sponsorships from recognizable brands, with a following large enough to generate meaningful monthly revenue, looks nothing like what it was when she was documenting a first house renovation, with no guarantee anyone was watching. But the logic of it is exactly the same as it was in Louisville when the mortgage stopped making sense. Find the thing that's broken, do the work to fix it, document what you learn, repeat. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Here is what the title of this video is actually about. The $1 house was not the decision her followers didn't see coming. By the time she bought it, she was already on YouTube, already renovating, already building an audience. The $1 price was surprising. The project was large, but it was a continuation of a pattern she had already established in North Dakota. The decision her followers didn't see coming was the one that made all of it possible, the original move. She was a woman in her late 20s, working in health insurance in Louisville, whose salary had stopped covering her mortgage during a pandemic. She had options. She could have found another job in the same city. She could have moved to a more affordable neighborhood within the metro. She could have done what the economics of the moment made obvious and stayed close to the life she had already built. Instead, she looked at property markets in states nobody from Louisville was moving to. She identified a pattern: affordable housing in rural areas that had been overlooked because they didn't fit the story that most Americans were telling themselves about where opportunity lived. She moved to a small town in North Dakota alone, with no professional network and no community waiting for her on the other side. And she started buying houses. The decision was not about houses. It was about refusing to accept the premise that the life she had built was the only version of the life she could have. The houses were the mechanism. The move was the choice. That distinction matters because it's the thing her content doesn't announce directly. Tia Weston's videos are about renovation. They're about the work, what breaks, what holds, what has to be ripped out and started over, what turns out to be better than expected. But underneath all of that, every video is about a woman who made a decision that didn't make obvious sense at the time, in a direction that most of the people who knew her probably would not have predicted, and built something real from it. The second abandoned house is now in progress. The town still has more empty properties than she can renovate alone. The channel is still posting every Sunday morning, and the woman who bought a condemned building for $1, who was a health insurance worker in Louisville not long before that, is still doing the thing that nobody saw coming. An alma story of Tia Weston is not really about what a house costs. It's about what it costs to make a decision that doesn't come with any guarantee, and then do the work anyway. The second abandoned house in her small North Dakota town is currently in progress. Whatever it becomes, it won't be the last one. She said as much publicly. There are more empty houses in that town, and she's named reviving them as the goal she's working toward, one property at a time. So here's the question worth sitting with. Tia walked away from a stable career in a familiar city to move alone to rural North Dakota with a renovation plan that had no proven track record yet. Most people in that position would have found a way to make the existing situation work. Do you think she made the right call leaving everything behind? Or is that the kind of risk most people can only admire from a distance?